Okay, right. So over to you.
It's got a bit of a technical issue moving the slides on. Oh, it's okay. It's moved it on. Okay, that's good. Thanks very much, Mike. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight. My main interests, in addition to Roman roads, are in landscape archaeology and ritual in the landscape of Roman Britain. And I'm currently a part-time doctoral student, as Mike said, and my research is focused on ritual in the landscapes of Roman Britain. And tonight I wanted to talk about a somewhat underexplored topic, the connection between Roman roads and religious sites, specifically rural Romano-Celtic temples. And this topic is the subject of a forthcoming itinerary paper that I've written, which will be published in the summer. So research on Romano-Celtic temples has traditionally centred on the sites themselves, with their broader landscape context often receiving only brief coverage. However, the observations that have been made suggest that the relationship with the surrounding landscape is valuable for understanding them. And Roman roads were, of course, a key in the landscape of Roman Britain, but I think it's important that we consider the relationship between roads and temples within their respective wider landscape context. So before moving on to roads, I wanted to just briefly summarise some of the other commonly observed connections between these Romano-Celtic temples and the landscape. So they were in use in Britain from the mid first century, to the early 5th century AD, with most of the excavated sites found south of a line from the Wash to the Severn Estuary, and none of them survived to their original height, and very few above foundation level. And whilst other religious structures that share an element of concentricity are reasonably categorized as Romano-Celtic temples, and whilst there are variations on this format, they are strictly defined as having an inner cella surrounded on at least three sides. I should be on this one, surrounded on at least three sides by a walkway or ambulatory. At many sites, a square or rectangular temenos, ditch, or wall enclosed the temple precinct. And other forms of sacred space in Roman Britain are more numerous, geographically dispersed, and diverse in form than Romano-Celtic temples. So focusing on them in particular is very much an initial exploration of the potential connections between roads and religious sites in Roman Britain. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of those connections. Firstly, there's a connection between Romano-Celtic temples and older ritual features in the landscape. Almost 60% of excavated early Romano-Celtic temple sites in Britain have some evidence for previous ritual activity. For example, under the temple at Ely in Gloucestershire are the remains of an earlier shrine, a square timber structure in a sub-rectangular ditched enclosure, which was constructed in the half century preceding the Roman conquest. Temples were also frequently constructed close to prehistoric monuments, such as barrows. And in the foreground of the image here, you can see the unexcavated Romano-Celtic temple site at Keasley Farm in Wiltshire, near RR46, we think, with a Bronze Age round barrow right next to it. The significance of Neolithic and Bronze Age barrows in the Romano-British period has been demonstrated by not just their proximity to temples on occasion, but also those yielding Romano-British pottery, coins or burials, so indicating reuse. Connections between Romano-Celtic temples, settlements and villas are also a common theme, with temples frequently found within the vicinity of a villa estate or a contemporary settlement. It's notable that most Romano-Celtic temples and villas were constructed during the mid to late Roman period and often shared similar construction methods, suggesting that many temples were integral components of broader villa estates. And whilst worshippers' offerings must have played a role in financing the building and the maintenance of these temples, they must also have been closely associated with the native elite, the Romanized native elite, who had access to the resources to build and the land required. Priests were likely to have been elected or appointed officials or otherwise important members of a local community, and it seems likely that the largest rural sanctuaries were owned at the civic level. These relationships suggest that the construction and maintenance of temples was linked to concerns that extended beyond exclusively religious matters. So in the modern world, we're used to drawing that distinction between the sacred and the secular, and these two spheres are likely to have overlapped in the Roman period. This was certainly the case in Rome, where sanctuaries had always played multiple roles before the boundaries between sacred and secular space became even more blurred in the imperial period. Similarly, rural temples in Roman Britain, such as those that we're looking at here, may have served purposes beyond ritual, functioning as venues for markets and other gatherings. For example, it's been suggested that the large number of coins discovered at the Womburgh Temple in Wiltshire indicates public activity and business. Connections between temples and the natural landscape have also been emphasised, such as a proximity to water. It's also frequently observed that Romano-Celtic temples are found in elevated positions. Elevation has in turn been linked to visibility, including looking from or towards temples and into visibility with other landscape features, such as rivers or other temples. And the visual impact of temples was enhanced through painted exteriors, distinctive red tile roofs, and the addition of towers. The prominence of temples within the wider landscape appears to have been a deliberate and significant aspect of their placement, with some situated to maintain visibility over the areas where people lived and worked. It's been suggested that high places were selected in Roman Gaul to express the superiority of the gods worshipped there, and that elevated positions for sacred sites in the ancient world more generally may have reflected a desire to secure divine protection over the landscape. So visibility from the surrounding landscape has direct relevance to the relationship between temples and Roman roads, as it may indicate a deliberate intention to signpost temples for travellers, a theme that itself is connected to broader discussions concerning the nature of journeys with temples as their destinations. And I'll explore that a little more later. But other suggested connections between roads and temples include the notions that the general proximity of temples to roads indicates that accessibility was key for their construction and maintenance, particularly rural temples, and essential to the prosperity of larger religious complexes. It's been suggested that some temples were deliberately situated by roads, and in some cases, such as Friars Wash in Hertfordshire and Titsey in Surrey, they were located in a position where the road shifted alignment. At Friars Wash, the stream nearby may have been an important factor in the selection of the location, and the temple is a few hundred metres away from Watling Street. However, the positioning in relation to the road is notable. Two conjoined temples were constructed here in the early 2nd century AD, and given that this postdates the road, Alex Smith suggests that the elaborate design of the temple complex here, and possibly its existence, can be attributed to that regular traffic along Watling Street. At Titsey, so that's Friars Wash on the image there, but you also have a picture here of Titsey, and as you can see on the other image, the temple was aligned parallel to RR14 and located much closer to it, with the temenos wall just 4.57 metres of where the road slightly shifts its alignment. The chronological relationship here between the temple and the road is less straightforward than at Friars Wash. However, I do argue in the paper that I've written on this topic in the forthcoming issue of Itinerary that this may reflect some level of collaboration between the temple builders and the authorities constructing the road. It's also been argued that roads were sometimes deliberately laid out to directly bend round and around pre-existing sacred sites, as David Bird suggests occurred at Ewell in Surrey and also Springhead in Kent. But in thinking about where to start on this topic, rather than those situated within nucleated settlements or towns where the interpretation of the relationship between temples and roads is likely to be more complex, a good starting point for research into this topic is to perhaps focus on two broad categories of Romano-Celtic temples. Firstly, there are those that are found very close to roads, yet may be considered atypical nucleated roadside settlements in the sense that they appear to have been rural religious complexes. So notably the large rural sanctuaries at Frilford in Oxfordshire near 164, Nettleton Shrub in Wiltshire on the Fosse Way, and the smaller religious complex we're seeing here at Friars Wash. Since Titsey is located right next to the road but isn't part of a larger settlement, it suggests that it could have been part of an important part of a roadside religious complex. However, excavations here were limited to the temenos, so we don't have a complete picture of that possible extent. The excavations were in 1936. And the other category, secondly, are the rural temple sites found away from, but fairly close to Roman roads, of which the numerous examples include Lancing Down in West Sussex near 153, Wood-Eaton in Oxfordshire near 160B, and Lamiat Beacon, which we're going to discuss later on. Lamiat Beacon's in Somerset. So we often think of Roman roads in functional terms, built for efficiency, first for military needs, later for trade. And of course, this is accurate. As Hugh Davis puts it, they were artifacts built to assist people to journey efficiently. But roads weren't just practical, they had other cultural and symbolic meanings for people as well. As Robert Witcher notes, by cutting through occupied spaces and reshaping the landscape, roads influenced how people understood their world. Beyond function, roads symbolise power, and much of the discussion relating to symbolism and perceptions focuses on their role not just as infrastructure, but as statements of Roman control and civilization. As Anne Cole puts it, they were the foundation, symbol, and instrument of Roman rule. They physically imposed Roman authority on the landscape. For example, Keith Matthews has referred to the symbolism of roads cutting across the existing field patterns, of the agger being raised above the surrounding landscape and connecting places over long distances that was in sharp contrast to the localised sense of place experienced by people living in the pre-conquest period. However, the perceptions and meanings that were assigned to roads would also have changed over time, including their growing significance for individuals travelling to sacred sites. For example, although the Fosse Way is said to have lost much of its administrative significance relatively early on, it came to facilitate a substantial flow of religiously orientated traffic to Bath. This was also likely to have influenced the development of the religious complex at Nettleton Shrub, further north on the Fosse Way. Nettleton is one of the examples that used by Philip Kiernan when he uses the term pilgrimage to describe travel to Romano-Celtic temples. Aside from proximity to roads, another clue for travel to religious sites is the presence of possible guest accommodation. At larger complexes, such as Linley Park and Ewley in Gloucestershire, and possibly Nettleton, there are signs of such facilities. Even smaller sites like Pagan's Hill in Somerset, the site of which is on the image here, might have offered some form of lodging. The supposed guest accommodation at Pagan's Hill is on the plan on this slide. That said, any accommodation was probably reserved for high-status guests at these sites, and as Dirk suggests for Romano-Gallo temples, most visitors were likely to have stayed in tents. However, in Britain, little excavations taken place outside the immediate temple sites, and this means that some rural temples, which seem isolated now, may have once been part of larger complexes, and that's what I alluded to with Titsey. The term pilgrimage is, however, somewhat problematic. Ancient pilgrimage is difficult to define. It's difficult to recognise it archaeologically in Roman Britain. Whilst portable votives that might be associated with sacred travel are present at some sites, there is a lack of literary sources, depictions of pilgrims, and inscriptions as elsewhere in the ancient world. It can be challenging to distinguish between religious and secular forms of travel. Why are people travelling? However, as we discussed earlier, there is an evidence for a blurring of sacred and secular activity at temple sites in Britain, and Kiernan has argued that most travel in antiquity would have been multi-purpose. For these reasons, he defines pilgrimage as some kind of travel involving ritual destinations, even if the travel includes other religious purposes as well. Under this definition, any visitor to a temple isolated from nearby settlements would immediately fulfill the travel requirement of a pilgrimage. Kiernan also points out that rather than focusing on distance travelled, some anthropological models emphasise the movement of communities outside their normal environments. So these ideas really challenge our familiarity with pilgrimage in, say, a medieval Christian context, where we might consider it a single-purpose journey of a really significant distance. Ritual travel is perhaps a less loaded term that can embrace the idea that in addition to facilitating relatively long-distance ritual travel, Roman roads may have played an important role in enabling access to rural temples that were far enough from settlements to provide a distinct ritual setting, yet close enough for people to reach in a relatively short time. Indeed, it has been suggested that given the presence of household shrines, rural temples were less likely to serve everyday purposes and more likely associated with special visits, perhaps tied to the religious calendar. So what type of questions might we ask in relation to temples and roads? In studies of other periods and regions, landscape archaeology is used to interpret the potential intentions and motivations of builders in choosing specific locations for constructing sacred spaces. However, in Roman Britain, despite the probable involvement of the native elite in temple construction and the likely deliberate attempts to place temples within the landscape or to manage their settings, David Bird has pointed out that there has been little consideration of these settings and why particular places had temples at all. Furthermore, Alex Smith has questioned why so many temples were located in rural, non-settlement contexts and why certain sites were deemed worthy of devotion and how these sites were connected within the wider landscape. As an important feature of the landscape in the period, Roman roads are key to addressing such questions. So we might ask, how can roads help inform our understanding of why certain temple locations were selected? How roads and temples connected to the wider landscape and societal structures? Did the siting of pre-existing temples influence the course of roads? Were temples deliberately positioned in relation to pre-existing roads? And finally, whilst more challenging, we might explore the impact of roads on the experiences of visitors to temples. So I now want to take a more in-depth look at a particular area in the southwest of England, with Lamiat Beacon in Somerset as a focus for this, but drawing in some other sites as well. This is a good example of a seemingly isolated rural temple, which is close to the Roman network, but not part of a roadside settlement. And the temple was located within the now wooded area that you can see on the photograph. The temple was located at the summit of the narrow ridge of Creech Hill, close to the small village of Lamiat in Somerset, which is northwest of the small town of Bruton. So you can see it sits right on that ridge there. And I'll discuss more details of the temple in its local landscape shortly, but first of all, I want to take a look at the road network. So the closest roads to Lamiat Beacon were 5B, the Fosse Way, and a possible road, RRX 37. Several writers have suggested that 37 began at a junction with 5B at Pile Hill, about 5.5 kilometres west of the temple. It has been argued that this road may have terminated at the modern village of Lamiat, and the excavators suggest that if this was the case, that the road would have been constructed around perhaps 300 AD. So that's the excavators of the temple. And that would have been a decade after the temple was built in 290. They argue that the construction of a road specifically to serve the temple would reflect its status as a significant religious site. Research I published last year in Itinera suggests that it was likely that there was a road from Pile Hill to Lamiat, and the number 465X has been reserved for it. So I'll try and remember to use that number from now on. However, I suggested in that article that rather than terminating near the temple, or certainly in Lamiat, the temple is a bit of a hike, 20-minute hike up a steep hill, but certainly rather than terminating near the temple, or certainly within Lamiat, the road is likely to have continued past Lamiat, around the base of Creech Hill, passing through a valley before crossing the River Brue at Bruton. And I won't dwell too much on the evidence published last year on this, but there are a couple of interesting aspects, to me at least, to this section of 465 that I'd like to highlight. First of all, this shaded area is the two roads, 5B and 465. It's notable that both sections of both 5B and 465 in this area correspond to parish boundaries. So you can see if I put the parish boundaries on here, you can see them marked in purple on the map, and they follow 5B and 37. And the fairly straight section of 465 is also marked by a straight line of field boundaries for 2 kilometres, and is also a public footpath for the last kilometre, with ridge and furrow aligned alongside the boundary in certain parts. There is one break in the line of continuous field boundaries at Evercreech, and here Broomhead recorded in 1988 a concentrated scatter of over 300 sherds of mid-2nd to 4th centuries Romano-British pottery, which he suggests almost certainly represents an occupation site. And whilst the road isn't mentioned in the report, this location is very close to where 465 must have crossed the River Allen. The road has appeared very faintly on LiDAR and some aerial photographs in this field. The public footpath starts here and crosses this section before joining the rest of the straight field boundary. And historic mapping shows that the long straight line of field boundaries once covered this section as well. And so the straight field boundary here was once continuous along with the parish boundary for over 2 kilometres. Another interesting section of 465 is a bit further on, just before Lamiat, where the earthworks of a deserted medieval village are visible. Not yet, I'll show you in a minute, but they are visible at the point where the parish boundary, straight field boundary, and the footpath end. And the village appears to have formed along the route of the road. So just moving further east, whilst the proposed route between Bruton and Penpits, I argued in that piece that I published that the road certainly went as far as Bruton. And then the proposed route, whilst the proposed route between Bruton and Penpits, represented by the dashed line on the map here, needs further investigation, the Ordnance Survey Archaeological Division archive suggests that a straight 18th century coach road to the east of Bruton may indicate the course of the road. And it's interesting that this terminates just before Kenwalk's Castle, which is an Iron Age hill fort that you can see there, the star. Penpits, the circle that you see there on the right hand side, green sand was used predominantly for items including kernstones and whetstones, was quarried at Penpits. And this commenced in the Iron Age and continued throughout the Roman period, which might suggest a possible rationale for a road connecting 5B and 46 to the east. And you can see 46 now as we move further east. I've recently completed a research project which is in the appendix to my paper that's coming out in the summer, which has provided new evidence for the likely continuation of what is assumed to be 465 between Wolverton in Wiltshire, just to the east of Penpits, and Knapp Hill in Dorset, which appears likely to have eventually connected to 46 at Semley. So a few examples of the evidence that I've recently gathered on this. These images show the first evidence for the road east of Penpits. The HER suggests that the features in the field in the photo are medieval settlement earthworks, but it actually appears to be the agger of 465 extending for 422 metres in a southeasterly direction across the field, and it's cut by several northeasterly orientated features. And other aerial photographs show the feature continuing into the next field, and LiDAR imagery reveals a faint feature continuing the line from the first field and crossing the subsequent 3 fields before eventually joining a short section of field boundary. So that's that LiDAR image there. It's very faint, but it is there. The road line then follows that field boundary and shifts for a short while, and then it shifts alignment to the southeast, and then continues in a straight line of further field boundary for 1,200 meters. This entire stretch of field boundary marks both the present unitary authority boundary and that between the parishes of Mere and Gillingham. It has also formed part of the Wiltshire-Dorset boundary since at least 1831. That's the earliest map I have. And a public footpath runs along the boundary for most of this section. The likelihood that the boundary is of a much earlier date is suggested by ridge and furrow either side of the hedge on aerial photographs and LiDAR imagery. And LiDAR imagery, an aerial photograph here from 1924 shows a short stretch of rough earthworks that may be related to the road to the south of the hedge line. Further on, the road can also be seen as faint crop marks on several aerial photographs, which correspond to a feature spanning the same location on this LiDAR image. The road is also clear in a crop mark on the aerial photograph here, cutting across the top of the field to the southeast of the feature on the LiDAR image. So I think you have can't quite see it here. These images are kind of partly overlapping, but the LiDAR image, if you look just before on the LiDAR image after the river, that field there, or past that stream, that field where the red line is protruding from the southeast is the aerial photo field. Another example is where at the end of a straight stretch of modern road here, at the point where it turns south, so you can see the road there turning south, a short section of field boundary continues on that line of the modern road for 55 meters. And then what appears to be the Roman road is then visible as it skirts the base of a hill on both aerial photographs and LiDAR until the next field boundary. And 3D LiDAR imagery also appears to show the road crossing this field and across the boundary into the next field before joining the line of the modern road. Now, the Ordnance Survey Archaeological Division suggests that the road connected to 46, which is visible, really clearly visible in this section here, just south of what I think is a more direct route.
Watching,
Just short of a more direct route. The more direct route is also aligned with fairly straight field boundaries and the modern road as it passes through Semley. So, as I mentioned earlier, evidence from the first section of 465 suggests that it didn't terminate at Lamiat, but rather continued to Bruton. And as we've seen, there is now evidence for a section of the road assume the same road, between Penpits and Knapp Hill, which we can assume joined 46. If the full length of 465 connected the Fosse Way and 46, it would probably post-date both roads, but predate construction of the Lamiat Beacon Temple. Overall, the evidence does seem to rule out the idea that 465 was built specifically to serve the temple. Now, in the broader area on the map here, it's notable that all three temples are fairly close to Roman roads, with Coal Kitchen Hill and Lamiat Beacon both in elevated positions, whilst Keasley Farm is on lower ground. And there's been a lack of evidence, that dotted line on 46, there's been a lack of evidence for it as it approaches the junction with 45B, but I do understand some work underway on that road, which will be very, very helpful. Coal Kitchen Hill, which is to just to the north, the northwest of Keasley Farm, and 17 kilometres to the northeast of Lamiat Beacon, has a similar relationship really to 45B that Lamiat Beacon does to 465. It's a bit of a climb, quite a climb up to that site. Although, and I just get my, make sure I got my notes here. Although there is the possibility that 52 past the temple, so 45B, you know, it's quite a climb from that route of 45B. There is the possibility that 52 past the temple or an earlier sacred site directly, as you can see that line there, that it might have cut through there. And so I've got two potential routes there. And obviously understanding which of those routes is correct is going to be really, really important for understanding Cold Kitchen Hill. So Cold Kitchen Hill is it was excavated in the 19th century and again in the 1920s, and the temple is now only visible on aerial photographs as soil marks measuring 50 by 50 meters, which have been interpreted as the outline of the temenos, but it has been excavated on a number of occasions. The image here overlooks the temple site, and in the distance is Pertwood Down, which was crossed by 45B, which ran from Old Sarum in the east to Charterhouse in the Mendip Hills. The excavation evidence suggests that the use of the hilltop on Cold Kitchen Hill on which the Cold Kitchen Hill temple was located, extended from the Iron Age to at least the early 5th century. But there's insufficient evidence to prove that the temple here was constructed directly on the site of an Iron Age shrine, as some have suggested. However, the number of Iron Age brooches found in the 1920s excavations, which might be interpreted as votive offerings, suggest that when considered together with the Iron Age occupation, that the hilltop may have been a focus for ritual activity in the pre-Roman period. Finding the definitive route of 52, as I mentioned, will be very important in understanding Cold Kitchen Hill. However, regardless of which route can be proven, as I mentioned earlier, the Fosse Way appears to have seen much religious traffic to Bath, and 52 also terminates at Bath. Thus, access to this important location was facilitated here via 52 through its connections with 45B and 46, with Cold Kitchen Hill in an interesting and prime position relative to these roads. And just zooming out here while we've got this map for a little more of a regional view, it's notable that a number of Romano-Celtic temples in this area were fairly close to known or likely Roman road routes. So just going back to 465 between Pile Hill and Amiat, where we started, whilst it appears unlikely that the road was built specifically to serve the temple, it is plausible that the temple location was chosen, at least in part, to take advantage to its proximity to this road and the Fosse Way. So just to give you a flavour of, this is an aerial photo, so you've got the village of Lamiat in the west here, and the temple on the ridge in that now wooded area. And here's a view. So the views are very extensive. This is over the Somerset levels. I mentioned it takes about 20 minutes to get up there. The views are fantastic, and you have expansive views. You can see, not on this photo, but to the left of this image is Glastonbury Tor, and you can really see right across the Somerset levels. And this is looking towards the southwest. So the views are predominantly from from these positions. These are the most expansive views, and this is the ridge looking out from more or less where just a bit further on from where the temple was before it was excavated. So just a bit of background on this temple. Lamiat Beacon was excavated by a team led by Roger Leach between 1958 and 1960, and again in 1973. The use of the temple was built around 290 AD. So remember, Cold Kitchen Hill was 210. This is 290. It remained in use until the early 5th century. It was 11 meters square with a central cellar surrounded by an ambulatory. And 2 square annexes were symmetrically positioned on the east side, while a small sunken room on the south side was accessible only from the ambulatory, and this completed the layout. The cemetery there to the northeast is early medieval in date, and the fact that it was constructed here appears to indicate that the site had some enduring significance beyond the Roman period. Now, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of associations, it is important to note that most of the other frequently observed associations with Romano-Celtic temples are not present at Lamiat Beacon. There's not a spring, there's not access to water on the hilltop. That doesn't appear to have been significant or important in the decision to locate the temple here. Furthermore, unlike at Cold Kitchen Hill, there is very limited evidence for pre-Roman or even Roman activity on the hilltop at Lamiat Beacon prior to the temple's construction. The most significant prehistoric feature in the surrounding landscape is Fox Covert, an unexcavated Iron Age hill fort located 650 metres to the northwest, which you can see here, the star marks the spot. I think there's quite a lot that can be said about the relationship between Romano-Celtic temples and hill forts. We probably don't have time, but it's quite interesting that that location was ignored. The hill forts have been used elsewhere to locate Romano-Celtic temples. So just looking more broadly in the landscape, whilst there's limited evidence for field systems and other settlements contemporary with Lamiat Beacon in its immediate landscape, apart from that occupation site we saw earlier beside 465 where it crossed the River Alum at Evercreech, the construction and use of the Lamiat Beacon Temple coincided with a period of prosperity in the wider Civitas centred on Ilchester or Lindinnis to the southwest. And whilst the area to the north of Blackmore Vale, which is kind of between Lamiat Beacon and Ilchester, which includes Lamiat Beacon, was more sparsely populated with villas than that area around Ilchester, and you can see it really clearly on the map here, where there are at least 50 villas of mainly 3rd and 4th century date around Ilchester. There were still 6 likely villas within 8 kilometres of the temple site. Whilst only those at Bratton, Seymour and Ditcheat have been excavated, Thiessen polygons provide a hypothetical estimate of the potential estate territories associated with the 6 villas. So this is a way of mathematically generating an idea of what the territories of these villas might have been. So they are hypothetical. But it's interesting that running this analysis, that whilst the East Panhard Village site is fairly close to 5B and 465, the hypothetical estate there linked to the Ditcheat Villa is located 3.5 kilometres southwest of the temple, and it encompasses Lamiat Beacon and a section of 465 as it approaches the temple location. The limited dating evidence from Ditcheat suggests that the villa may have been in use at the same time as Lamiat Beacon, and whilst this analysis should be treated with caution, the temple's position potentially close to the boundary of 4 of these villa estates might indicate that it was shared by them. And this would be comparable to the temple at Wood End in Hertfordshire. That was located 3.5 kilometres from 2 villas and perhaps lying within the estate of one of them or on their common boundary, and was likely to have been used by the local inhabitants of these estates. So it's hypothetical, but it provides us with an indication of what might have been going on.
Yeah, maybe it is underneath something.
And then this kind of information, this idea of villa estates aligns with the way that Lamiat Beacon's been classified, thought of. Rodwell thought of it as an estate temple, which was connected to one of the 6 estates and perhaps shared by them. However, what's interesting in terms of the road network is that the excavators argue that Lamiat Beacon was a local cult centre. However, the estate temple and cult centre interpretations are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The focus of the cult was likely to have been Mars, conflated with a Cernunnos type deity, which also appears to be venerated at Coal Kitchen Hill. And portable votive objects, which might be indicative of visitors travelling some distance, were found at Lamiat Beacon, with some of the brooches being poor copies, including one that could only have had symbolic value, which reinforces the idea that these portable brooches were made for visitors to a cult centre, intended as votives or souvenirs. And that was the interpretation of the excavation team. More broadly, the Lamiat Beacon assemblage is remarkably similar to that at Coal Kitchen Hill, with both including miniature axes, horseman brooches and antlers, suggesting that the same deity was worshipped at both locations. No other buildings were found at Lamiat Beacon. So no other buildings were found at Lamiat Beacon unless we can find additional accommodation. And it's unusual, Lamiat Beacon, in that they did excavate across onto that ridge and nothing else was found. So if there was accommodation, it was probably via tents and suggest people travelling from a relatively local area or stopping off. So with this in mind, it's quite interesting that, and obviously we don't know all the unknown local trackways, but this is an analysis of likely travel times via the Fosse Way and 465 from Ilchester, and also 5B, the junction with 5B at Pile Hill. And it does suggest that the road network made Lamiat Beacon accessible for people travelling on the Fosse Way, or even from the area around Ilchester with that prosperous concentration of villas. And as I mentioned earlier, by the time the temple was constructed, the Fosse Way was already an important routeway for religious traffic to the cult centre at Bath. If Lamiat Beacon was, or the selection of the location of Lamiat Beacon was at least partly connected to an intention to capitalise on that traffic on the Fosse Way, it may have been influenced by the success of the shrine constructed much earlier in 69 AD, but also the subsequent temple sequences built around 60 years before Lamiat Beacon at Nettleton, which itself benefited from a significant volume of religious traffic travelling to Bath. And you can see Nettleton here, north east of Bath. However, Thomas Blagg has noted that the temple at Nettleton was set back from the road and within a steep valley, meaning that it would have been scarcely visible from the road. And the earliest location of the shrine may be associated with its position on the south bank of the Broadmead Brook. So whilst it may have benefited from the road and the traffic on that road over time and flourished because of it, it wasn't necessarily constructed to take advantage of the road. In contrast, Lamiat Beacon occupied a distinctive elevated position with extensive visual prominence. And it's this prime visibility from the Fosse Way that Alex Smith has suggested was likely to have contributed to the success of the cult at Lamiat Beacon. Furthermore, we of course now have more information on 465. This is a reverse view shed which shows that the temple could have been visible from a significant stretch of 5B and a prominent feature along much of 465 until reaching the present-day village of Lamiat. And anywhere orange on this map represents a place in the landscape from where the temple could have been visible. And it doesn't take account of vegetation, but nonetheless, it gives an indication based on the elevation of where the temple could have been visible from. It's also notable that, given that discussion of the temple in relation to the estates, that Lamiat Beacon was likely to have been visible from large parts of the Ditcheat estate territory, the Ditcheat Villa itself, and other nearby estates. It is notable, and we have more certainty here because this reverse view shed certainly shows us the limitations of the visibility to the Ditcheat Villa. So in contrast to East Pennard, which was located near to 5B and 465, the Ditcheat Villa was further from both roads. Additionally, it definitely could not have been highly visible from either road or the surrounding landscape. I mentioned earlier that Romano-Celtic temples are associated with the native elite, and observed that the construction of Lamiat Beacon coincided with the expansion of villas around Ilchester. I also mentioned that the motivations of these elite groups that are likely to have been associated with the temples might not have always been exclusively religious, and in this respect, whilst the agricultural role of villas was significant, they did also express status and identity. However, projecting status and identity might extend beyond the villa itself. For example, a study of the Bartlow Hills in Cambridgeshire by Hella Eckard and colleagues has suggested that they were also used, these barrows were used to make statements about power and identity to a local audience. Beyond purely religious motivations, the decision to build and support a temple at Lamiat Beacon may have similarly served a powerful way for an elite group, perhaps associated with the villa at Ditcheat or a combination of them. And remember, the Ditcheat villa is not very prominent in that landscape, to express and project their status and identity. the temple's hilltop position would have made a striking impression, not only on people in nearby estates and perhaps as far as the area around Ilchester, but also on religiously orientated travellers heading to Bath via 5B, and of course, if they came off, anybody approaching on 465. But given the lack of evidence for pre-temple ritual activity at Lamiat Beacon, as well as the absence of water and other characteristics that might have influenced its selection, the site for what was a new temple in 290 AD may have been chosen for this combination of visual prominence and accessibility by the road network. At the same time, transplanting an already well-established cult from Coal Kitchen Hill to this highly accessible location would have maximised opportunities to attract visitors, with the road network playing a crucial role in ensuring its reach. So by combining this accessibility and visual prominence with the existing cult, whoever built, the patrons of this temple, created the best conditions they could for its success, whilst also reinforcing their own status and identity. Now, the success of this temple at Lamiat Beacon, this new temple, as I describe it in 290, appears to be indicated or signified by the construction of another temple 40 years later, 45 kilometres to the northwest at Breen Down, right alongside the Severn Estuary. And this was similar in design to Lamiat Beacon. You can see here comparing the two plans. And whilst there are a few finds, Breen Down also yielded antlers, which you recall were also found at Lamiat Beacon and Coal Kitchen Hill. The temple was orientated directly towards Lamiat Beacon, and whilst it's uncertain if the temple at Lamiat Beacon itself was visible across the Somerset levels, the visibility analysis suggests that Lamiat Beacon as a hilltop was likely visible from Breen Down, acting as a marker for the temple that sat upon it. So just to round up really, in conclusion, I suppose I'm arguing here for an integrated approach that explores how Romano-Celtic temples and Roman roads influenced each other in the context of their wider landscape settings. However, much more work is needed. It's an initial attempt from me, but we might also in time broaden out from Romano-Celtic temples to other religious sacred sites in Roman Britain, which I mentioned earlier, are more diverse, they're more numerous, and more geographically distributed. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Neil. That was fascinating.
Shall I stop sharing, Mike?
You can do, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Right, I did a very, very silly thing before we started, which is not unusual for me. I do that all the time. I forgot to tell everybody that you can, of course, use the chat function to put some questions to you. I didn't do that. So if anybody who is new wants to put a question to Neil, please do so through the chat and they will be relayed to me. I'm just going to very quickly have a look.
Hi, Mike. Yes, there are a couple of questions there already, so hopefully you've had
Yes,
the email.
yeah. Just bear with me. I've just had to open up Outlook again. She's playing silly beggars. Right, I'll get this one out of the way first of all, which I did see in the chat. It was a question from Penny. I'm assuming that's Penny Jackson, regarding an alleged Roman ford that was found, it must be about 2 years ago now. Can't really say too much about the location, but it's a tricky one. Many of you may have actually seen this. It looked like it was a paved ford. Paved in a similar way that you would see roads in and around Italy and the Mediterranean, close to towns, but totally unheard of in this country. So it was a very, very exciting find. Now, 2 points. First, was it a ford? Well, the short answer is we don't know because it was only found on one side of a watercourse. Second, was it a paved ford? Somebody answered this in the chat, sort of. It's currently been interpreted as a natural layer of stone. I think the person in the chat called it bedrock. I never got to see it for various reasons, but that interpretation has been questioned. Um, I've got to be careful what I say here. What it's important to know about this particular road is that it had defined edges. So if it was a natural layer, then the stone either side was quarried away, leaving this particular layer that looked like it was paved. That's about all we know about it until the report comes out, and I haven't had access to anything yet. So I hope that answers your question, Penny. Right, on to the important stuff, which is regarding Neil's talk. Oh, and it's another one on that four it's been answered. Right, one. Who's that from? Right, from Albert to start with. Is there evidence of a link road from Friars Wash to the main road?
Not that I'm aware of, but I haven't studied it in great depth, Friars Wash, so I'm not sure. But it's about 400 meters. Those two temples are about 400 meters from the road. So yeah, I know more about Titsy than that one, which is a fascinating site.
Okay. We've got two questions now from Susan. Susan Rands, one of ours. Right, we saw the temple as being by a bend in the road, but is it possible that the bend was previously a Y junction, a place where a choice had to be made? Susan's thinking back to Becky Haslam's talk on the roads in Southwark, where that seemed to be the case.
Yeah, which ones are we talking? Which whereabouts were we on the whereabouts were we noting these?
It was when you were pointing out a couple of temples that were close to a change in alignment of the road.
Oh yes, I see what you mean.
The
Yeah,
ones that Susan is referring to are in Southwark,
yeah,
so just south of the Thames.
yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned, the one I'm most familiar with is Titsy, and it's really that one where you where it's aligned. The temenos is literally 4 meters, 4 or 5 meters from the road, and right where it changes alignment. And it's quite hard to unpick that. And I do go into a lot of detail, quite a lot of detail on it in the paper I wrote, and it it seems to be that the temple had to change that one. It had to change alignment somewhere to get up the downs, to basically get up the escarpment of the downs.
Yes.
But it there are lots of other factors there. So there's a source of a river nearby as well. It's on slightly higher ground, so it's probably too complicated to go into now. But that's a very interesting one. I think that there's some temple sites that's been suggested that the roads bent round them or deliberately respected them, and I think the ones I've come across, it's more likely that the temple is respecting the road than the other way around.
Yeah. Okay. Again from Susan, is there any evidence of the deities worshipped in these temples? If so, is there any pattern in any routes from one temple to others associated with the same deity?
I don't know. It'd be a good research project, though.
Mm.
I think that's a good idea for a paper, I have to say.
I suspect that we don't have enough information.
No,
Have that one on me.
Sorry, Susan?
I said, have that one on me.
yeah, it's a good idea, Susan, isn't it? And there's definitely connections between Coal Kitchen Hill, Lamiat Beacon, and Brean Down. And yeah.
Next from Jody Lewis. Do we necessarily need a road to serve a temple?
No. I agree. I agree with that one. I think I did mention notwithstanding unknown local trackways, but we do know that the Foss Way was used to access Bath, and it's quite, of course, local people, very local people would have used trackways that we don't have access to. So we're really working with the evidence we've got. We can only work with what we've got.
She goes on to say many temples in the southwest are on or near early sites, so existing routeways may have been reutilized.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think Coal Kitchen Hill is quite interesting in that regard.
Yes. From Paul Wood. Interesting to see the lack of sites north of the Midlands.
Mm.
Any thoughts or observations on this?
Well, it is true that that was a map of the excavated Romano-Celtic cities. They do seem to be in that line from the Wash to the Severn Estuary. If we had a map of the much more diverse sacred space, other types of sacred space that aren't Romano-Celtic temples, it is much more spread, throughout the country. So it just these are, something about that lowland area and the association with villas and prosperity, etc.
Next one from Lyndon. Have you looked at the accessibility via watercourses as well as via roads? I noticed a couple of your maps did show rivers nearby.
Yeah, well, hello to Lyndon. I know Lyndon, so I'll say hello, Lyndon. Um, uh, But it's certainly possible. Yeah, it's very difficult to. I mean, that would be another interesting project, wouldn't it, to work out some of those. Just thinking about them. I mean, Brean Down is by the Severn Estuary, so that obviously, that's is an interesting one. Some of them, some of those were more streams than rivers, I would say, on some of those maps there. I'm trying to think of one that wasn't. Certainly near Coal Kitchen Hill, the river runs runs down in the valley below Coal Kitchen Hill, the River Wiley. That's an interesting one there for which may have also formed. Coal Kitchen Hill may have been a boundary in the pre-Roman and then during the Roman period between three different areas and the river as a boundary as well there. So I think it's an interesting point.
I'm reluctant to speak for her because she's upstairs, but my other half's currently working on a temple site in Gloucestershire, Little Dean,
Ah, ah,
not specifically on the finds from there, but its
yeah,
position is quite stunning, overlooking the Severn. Clearly chosen for
yeah,
overlooking that
yeah,
huge bow in the Severn.
yeah, yeah.
Not a mistake. And
Right,
the
yeah,
issue of people traveling some distance to get there is starting to raise its head. But
yeah.
I can't say any more than that. She'll kill me. I think Jodie, who was a previous question, knows a bit about that. Anyway, I digress. Next one from Kevin Cook. What would a traveller do at such a temple? Give thanks for a safe journey so far? Or would there be a place to stay associated with a temple or food or similar
Mm.
hospitality to
Yeah, I
travelers?
mean that's the interesting about this. I mean, I sort of mentioned that especially these isolated rural sites or the religious the bigger complexes like Nettleton, um, Ewley, that people may have gone there on special occasions. Now, the accommodation is one of the tricky bits. Now, some of them have accommodation. You saw even at Pagan's Hill, which is quite a small site, looks like it had accommodation, and certainly others such as Lindley Park, Nettleton potentially. But then Lamiat Beacon, there's no sign of any um, accommodation there, and you know, even though it's relatively accessible via the road network, in particular that one, that there's no sign of that. And
Yeah.
right in Gaul, it's been suggested that tents, temporary accommodation, would have been used, but they are very isolated. It's one of the puzzling things about some of these temples.
Mm.
Weren't exactly you know they didn't seem to have the facilities that you might expect, but some did. But we call those
Yeah.
religious complexes.
I mean, is this an issue that Tony King's got an opinion about? I've not spoken to him about it, but
No, I don't. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure.
okay. Next one from Phil Taylor, who says, "Hi Neil, is it possible that Breen and Lamiat could have been used for messaging,
Yeah,
using perhaps fires at night, semaphore
yeah.
by day?"
I think that's a really good point. Um, there's no. I mean, I've obviously been to both locations, and there's no doubt that if there were beacons lit, they would be visible from there. I agree with that. Yeah.
The visibility certainly is important. I don't think there's any question about that. But
Yeah.
we're some way off from fully understanding it. Andy Stevenson, two questions. Oh, I should have said that Phil Taylor finished his question by saying great talk. So just
Oh, that's good. Thank you, Phil. Thank you. It's really nice of you.
yeah, two questions from Andy Stevenson. First of all, how much were these temples commercial concerns? Are you taking advantage of religious ritual beliefs? That's the first
Mm.
part.
Mm. Well, I did mention in the talk that it does look like there this kind of division between sacred and secular that we kind of have. I'm not sure that was really operational in the period. And I mentioned the Wambra temple where there's been lots of coins found and a suggestion that there was business conducted there. Coal Kitchen Hill, it's been suggested, was a market as well. So I think there was a blur. I think there potentially was a blurring, and I think that kind of plays into my argument really that taking that on board, that who had the resources to build these things? It was the elite groups, and were their motivations purely were they purely piety, or was there mixed in with that some status and identity motivations as well, which I think would have been the case, but can't know for sure.
Well, it certainly was very often the case in Roman society, wasn't it? I don't see why it would be any different from when it came to building a temple, which would be a very expensive task.
Absolutely.
Somebody's got to pay for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Whether
some
it was a business enterprise to generate money, I think it's more likely it was, people were, um, supporting it, but it probably had multiple purposes from the people that were supporting it and constructing it.
and Andy's second question: could every parish have a temple or shrine arrangement, but only the ones that were well geographically connected, prospered, and survived in the archaeological record?
So when we talk about parish, we mean,
Yeah, Pagus, presumably.
yeah, Pegasus. Yeah, it's possible. And I don't know what the Pegasus structure is in this area, so it's very hard to. I did have a look, so it's very hard to know. That those temples around Lamia Beacon, they do seem to be kind of nicely, separate into, there seem to be, a nice even pattern to they're not clustered together. They're an even kind of, so I thought that's quite interesting. There's potentially something on territories there, but we are, hypothesizing a bit.
We'd have to be in a position to have a good idea of where the Pagi were.
Yeah,
And to
exactly.
do that, we've got to have a full picture of the settlement pattern, and we're some way off that
Yeah,
yet.
and there's not a lot of that stuff around Lamiat Beacon,
No,
unfortunately, either.
no.
Unfortunately, yeah.
But it's an interesting
It
idea.
is a really interesting idea. Yeah.
Oh, there's plenty more. Um, Judy Mead. There was a temple to Isis found at Thornborough in
Mhm.
Buckinghamshire near several Roman roads.
Mhm.
That's a comment rather than a question.
Yeah, that's
Not one I've
not
come
too far
across.
from me actually, because
All right.
that's near Milton Keynes, isn't it, Thornborough? I'm in Bedfordshire. I don't know much about it, but I should go and find out more because that's not very far away. And yeah.
Next one from Craig. Pilgrims are still walking on sections of extant Roman road surfaces in Spain on
Mm,
Caminos leading to Santiago de Compostela.
mm. Yeah, and this word pilgrimage is, I don't think it's the greatest word for what was going on. I mean, it's been argued by Philip Kiernan, a great paper, um, but it's probably got too much. Um, y- y- it's sort of applying perhaps a Christian concept, or we think of as a Christian concept, onto a different kind of world, but certainly this earlier period. It's a bit loaded, pilgrimage. It's very hard to pin down what it is and how you recognise it in the archaeological record. So I'd sort of focused on travel. But as we discussed, if some of these places were sites for business, as it were, as well. These are multiple purpose journeys. Everything's, it's. I think it's important to get away from the idea there was the sacred and then the secular. I think they were kind of mashed together a little bit.
From Bill Free, Lamyat dates, I think you said, to around 290 AD.
Yeah.
He comments this seems quite late within the Roman period to be constructing such a building, question
Yeah,
mark.
it was. Yeah, it's quite late. Yeah. But that's when it was. Colchichin Hill was 210. So yeah, it's think of the others around there. Bream Down was 340, was three 330. It was about 340, I think it was. So they are late. I mean, Bream Down would have only been around for, and I think Bream Down was, stuff was thrown into the sea. So I think it probably only had 60, 65 years of use.
I don't suppose turn of that century is necessarily late. It could relate to local economic prosperity
But there was that prosperity around Ilchester. That's when the villas are going up between the second and the fourth. Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessarily a surprise that we've got quite a lot of late ones. Jody Lewis again. Now, apparently, they have a new, still embargoed temple site in the heart of the landscapes you've been talking about.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So she says it'd be useful for you to contact.
I will
I'll
do.
give you details later.
Thank you very much, Jody.
From Andrew Buchanan, the idea of ritual stroke pilgrimage journeys needing to involve distance or hardship is a Western Catholic stroke Protestant concept. The Orthodox Church, which has changed far less since the 4th century, hence Orthodox, it's your presence venerating the religious objects that defines a pilgrimage. So no journey necessary.
That's the problem with the word pilgrimage. Yeah, agree. I mean, what is it? It's what do we mean by it? How do you recognize it?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's not much really more to say on that, is there?
That's a good point. It's a great point. It's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point.
It's from Joe's iPad, so I assume that's from Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks, Neil, for an excellent talk. You mentioned that the temples could be made more visible through being painted and decorated.
Yeah.
I know Frilford had painted roof tile. Is there evidence for similar decoration at your Somerset temple?
I'd have to go and have. I must admit, I've spent so long on the roads and the landscape. I can't recall on that. But then there's I'm pretty sure certainly Colchichin Hill. There's evidence for exterior painting. I can't remember at Lamyat Beacon precisely, so I'd have to go and look at that.
Okay. And at the moment, that is all we've actually got, which is
There's one there from John Lucas. If these buildings were constructed in the early century, 3rd century, do we know anything about what was there before? I.e., why the locals chose to build a stone brick temple or whatever structure may have preceded it. Well, at Lamyat Beacon, there was nothing there before, which is, it's quite an intriguing site. As I mentioned, I think around 60% of the excavated Romano-Celtic temples have some association with a previous ritual site. But at Lamyat Beacon, there was no evidence of that, and it was thoroughly excavated. So it's quite interesting. And I mentioned the hill fort as well, which is quite interesting. It's not very far away from Lamyat Beacon, but it seems to me that it was. I'm surprised that they didn't find anything of particular note on that hilltop. I have to say, but it was a pretty thorough excavation, and it wasn't significant what they found.
Anyone else got anything to put to Neil while you've got the chance?
Yeah, a couple of more have come up in the chat. I haven't haven't spotted those.
Rather than send them to me, do you want to
yeah,
you put them
yeah,
to me?
I don't know if you can see that from Graham Jones.
Yeah, and hello, Graham. I know Graham. It can only be one Graham Jones, the one that I know. It's a great point, Graham, and I think these temples, whilst they're they are one of the very recognisable, um, the sacred sites in ritual sites in Roman Britain are very diverse, and there's all kinds of different types. And of course, some of that, as Graham discusses, some of that would have been natural. Some of it would have been a spring, a tree. There's all kinds of different types of sacred site that would have been there, which we probably can't know now. We can't fully know that landscape in terms of what was there, but it is important not to overplay these temples because we have good evidence on them.
Yeah, on a related question, um, referencing previous ritual sites. This is from Martin Packer. Were most of these adopting the previous site or
Yeah,
obliterating it? That's a very good question.
it's a great question. Yeah, I think where I think there are. I think it would be more likely that they were adopting building over. So at Ely, there was a structure. It was built over an existing structure. So it depends on your definition of obliterating, but it does feel like they were being that it was some level of continuity going on in terms of the place that was being venerated, but not necessarily the need to preserve the structure. So they could obliterate them in constructing the new one. Um, but yes, so it's an interesting point.
Hmm. Um, yeah, certainly the site that I was mentioning earlier that my other half's been working on, there was quite something considerable going on before there. Um,
Yeah.
most of that hasn't been released yet, but if anybody's interested, Cult of the Head project,
Was it Little Dean? Is it Little Dean?
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
you
It's
might know
fascinating.
some
Yeah,
of
the
the stuff
Bend of the
that's come
Severn.
out.
Yeah,
It's
fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'd strongly recommend anybody look it up online because some of the material out of there is just wow.
yeah. And Susan makes the key point, around it's absolutely the case that there was syncretization of these cults. Mars. We talked about Mars um, conflated with a presumably Iron Age cult. But the Christians, if we look at the temple, I did a project on the Mithraea. So there were six that we know about temples of the cult of Mithras in Britain, mainly near military sites. And the evidence there is that it was likely to be the Christians that smashed them up and quite violently, particularly for example, at Carnarvon. There was a Temple of Mithras outside the Roman fort. And is it Carnarvon? I'm trying to remember where it was exactly. In North Wales. Anyway, the obvious smashing of statues, and there's obviously a violent end.
I don't think there's anything else. So how's the yes, there has. Yeah. Um, John Lucas, does that imply a direction finding function? Oh, I missed that. Hang on. I'm trying to go down my Outlook has stopped working, Susan, so I'm trying to scroll through to see things that haven't been we haven't had before. I'll fire it up again. Sometimes I hate Microsoft. No, there's
Yes,
not.
sorry, there are a load of questions, and then there seemed to be a lull, and now they're coming in again. So
Yes. Well, I've got Outlook up again, and it does appear to be working, but I haven't had anything for the last 10 minutes. Um, I'll have to scroll through them. Yeah, there are quite a few. I'm just trying to a lot of comments, and trying to find the questions from the comments isn't always easy.
I'll have a look as well and see if get them through to you.
I don't think we had this one from Lyndon. That the material culture might be clues. Could
Yeah.
horse symbolism be linked to travel or perhaps pasture?
Yeah, it's interesting because that those horseman brooches that were at Colchichin Hill and
Mm.
at Beacon. Um, yeah, I haven't really. I've spent most of my time with these sites looking at the landscape, and I think I think Lyndon's right. I think there's potentially something. There's somebody who is doing some work on the material culture of Colchichin Hill who wrote to me last year. So that would be re-looking at that assemblage. So I think that would be very interesting.
Mm.
I think that's right.
Right. Lots of thank yous.
That's very kind. Thank you very much.
Um, uh, sorry, I'm. This is. Here we go. Right. Susan sent me one. Thanks, Susan. That saved me struggling. From Jean Woodward. Very surprising that there seem to have been no contemporary writings about any of these
Ah,
sites in what was a
right.
very literate society.
Yeah, the evidence for, and this is moving beyond temples, for religion, ritual in Roman Britain, there's not a lot of um, writing about it. But the evidence is really, and actually there's some people writing about the Druids, etc. That kind of stuff about
Mm.
that period, but there's not really any written evidence. It is surprising, and what we understand about religion in this period, it wasn't kind of like we have religions. It was more to do with undertaking ritual practices correctly. So, it comes back to, I think, whoever made the point about syncretism, it seemed to be a lot of tolerance and diversity. And it was about ritual practice rather than having to believe a certain thing until, of course, Christianity took hold.
I don't think we have too much written about the rest of the Northern Empire, really, do we? It's not just here. Um,
Yeah, it's true.
very short of any literature about
Yeah, I mean,
North.
compared to Greece, for example, well,
Yeah.
there's plenty. And Craig talks about Elsner's book, which is yeah, it's a good book, that one. And that's around pilgrimage. But what happens is in that book and other books on pilgrimage, they tend to focus on they don't focus on the Northwest provinces. There's not a lot of stuff on pilgrimage on that in that area. Philip Kiernan's paper, 2012, is a really good read on it because he really looks at it in the Northwest provinces. There are curse tablets. That's very true. There are curse tablets, as Scott says. But yeah, that's probably more in the inscriptions. You call that writing. That is writing. So, but not descriptions of religious activities. A curse tablet's a particular type of ritual activity, really. But it's a good point. We've got curse tablets.
Yeah, plenty of them.
Yeah, and
Very amusing
some
ones
are
at
green
times.
down. Some are green down. Yeah,
Yeah, some of them are absolutely amazing. But
yeah, they're incredible. I
maybe we
really.
should get somebody to give us a talk on curse tablets. I can think of far worse subjects. They're brilliant.
Yeah, there's a great website on the curse tablets. I can't remember the address, but there's a great website breaking them all down. If you Google that.
All right,
Yeah,
not aware of that.
yeah,
Um, that's just, I think, from Susan. Travel to sacred sites had a long classical tradition,
yeah.
particularly to healing sites such as centers
Yes.
dedicated to Asclepius.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And uh, I went to one in Greece last year, Epidurus. Uh, but it's proving it for us is a little bit trickier. But certainly some of the bigger sites where they've got accommodation, etc., then it's got to be the case.
Certainly, I wish she'd come down and then she could tell you something about it. But the look, going back to Little Dean, some
Yeah,
of the stone heads that they've got there are not local stone.
no,
Now the analysis is ongoing, but
Mm.
it is suspected that some of them may have travelled, at least the stone for them may have travelled a substantial distance. Whether that's people bringing it with them to go there, and then
yeah,
somebody carved it on site, or they're carving these things and bringing them to that site. I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
My project is hiding. And I think we might be just about getting to the end, or maybe not.
Graham makes a good
So,
point about place names, and he is a real place name expert. He's right about that, of course. And uh, I think I might have inquired about one of the place names in one of these around one of these sites from Graham. But yeah, he makes a good point. And the
um,
geophysics at Uli looks very interesting as well, that Jack's
yes,
talking about. That's another one to, yeah, definitely look out for.
and Tony King has just actually mentioned that the Uli curse tablets have been published by OUP.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
I don't know if that was what you were thinking of.
yeah, it
More
wasn't actually.
relevant
There's
to
a
travel.
website as well, but that's a good point as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Right. This is your last chance, everybody. If you want to put anything to Neil, be very, very quick because I think that's just about it. Um, Lots of thanks and very well appreciated talk. No, it was brilliant. So
Well, thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate your time. That's really good of you to come along.
I'll just quickly scan through, make sure there's nothing I need to pass on to you. Oh, hang on. No, I'm just chuckling because apparently I was beating Susan to it. Right. Okay, that's it. So it just remains for me to thank everybody in the audience this evening, especially those who made a donation. Thank you very much. We couldn't keep putting these on without you. And one thing I did want to say about donations, actually, because we've been getting a lot in, and we're really, really grateful. We're actually going to use this decision's been made. We're going to use some of the money we've got from the donations to help to subsidize the production of Itinera, which means we can bring the price down a little bit. Now, I hope people don't mind. I'm sure people won't mind us doing that. Um, so everybody who's helping, thank you very much. And finally, um, just to thank you because it's been a brilliant talk, Neil, and I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Mark.
I have a sneaking feeling we're going to be talking quite a lot about some of your work in the future. And with that, we've got one more talk left in the series, and I'm desperately trying to remember who it is now. Oh goodness, I'm always embarrassed when I can't remember. What's his name? I know what it's about. Talking about Roman Sandy. Mike, somebody help me out.
Sorry, I've forgotten as well. I saw it earlier, so you're not alone. I've forgotten
Anyway,
also.
it's on
So
the website, and
it'll be good, whatever it is, I'm
I'll be
sure.
putting material out about it soon.
It's
Uh,
Mike Luke. Mike Luke.
Thanks, Dave. Mike Luke, that's it. I hope he's not in the audience. If so, I am so sorry. Um, okay, and with that, I think it just remains to wish everybody a very good night. Neil, we normally have a little conflab for about 5 minutes afterwards. So if you just log out and then log back in again.
Will do.
Right, so and that's it. Thank you all for attending. We've got a fairly early finish for once, despite the vast number of questions. But there we go. So from me and from Neil, thank you and good night.
Thanks, everyone.